Hello, and welcome
Hi.
to the Trauma Informed Parent Podcast. I'm Susie DeYoung. I'm here with my partner, Catherine Galda. Trauma Informed Parent is a resource for parents, educators, caregivers of children or young adults that have experienced a traumatic event. And I'm really, really excited to have somebody on today who I have great admiration for, both personally and professionally. Her work encompasses a number of modalities that are relevant to trauma, especially one we often don't recognize, which is spirituality. Rabbi Dr. Arielle Hanien, hope I'm saying that right, is a clinical psychologist who brings ritual and spiritual practice into her work in order to support healing. Widely recognized for her scholarship in both ancient and contemporary Jewish thought, the resolution of trauma, developmental psychology, education, neuroscience, and AI technology, Rabbi
Mm.
Hanien is also a certified somatic experiencing practitioner and has worked with one of our previous guests, Dr. Peter Levine, on many occasions. We are thrilled to have you with us and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be wonderful. So I'm going to start us off, and we're going to kind of take this from the broad to the more specific. So, as a first opening
Mm.
question, how do you find that spiritual practice really provides some support or a sense of meaning when a child is struggling with and trying to heal from trauma?
So I guess I would say to go really broad from the beginning. Um, there are ways to borrow from spiritual practice or tradition as a kind of band-aid or remediation. Um, but drawing from spirituality, I think of as more about drawing from a context that feels like it's always there, that it's a holding environment, um, that at least sometimes feels like it's bigger than where the trauma happened.
Mhm.
So trauma can disrupt a lot. It can disrupt relationships and trust, even in the world that we're part of, in a sense of safety and predictability and continuity. Sort of, and then we know what happens next. Trauma shatters that.
Right.
Um, but if it feels like there is a realm where the sun still rises and sets, and that there's a beautiful song in Les Mis, right, about the stars in their multitudes that can be counted on, even with the vicissitudes of, human interactions on the largest scales, then there's a sense of security on which we can draw, a sense of containment,
Mhm.
and just kind of being reminded of that can be all the words that we usually that we're accustomed to using when we're talking about healing. Grounding can provide for ease, can allow some room to exhale. It can take us out of a narrow fixation um, that is just being compounded on the problem, the danger, the negativity bias, the trauma vortex of what's wrong,
Mhm.
um, and bring us into the larger context where that's still true. And we're
Mhm.
not asking ourselves to come into some false consciousness where it's not important, or needs to be forgotten, but where there is also. So an
Love that.
example of this, let's say, that is not religious in nature, um, would be the cute pediatrician videos that go viral on Insta and TikTok, where the pediatrician knows this kid is in for a vaccine and the kid knows they're there for something that's presumably not going to be pleasant, but the pediatrician will just start throwing tissues or blowing bubbles or doing a boop, 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 boop on the kid's face. And there's all this other experience that is not negative, that's playful, that evokes wonder and delight and a kind of openness. And then there's a trauma. or
Mhm.
what would have been of the quick vaccine. But instead of the whole time going, but we'll get you ice cream afterwards, but it's only a little bit, but it's not that big of a needle, but it's just going to be a couple seconds.
Right.
Instead, here's all this wonderful. And so in spiritual terms, it's like, here's this regularity of what happens every single week, or that's been happening for generations. Or now we're chanting a melody that feels so familiar
Mhm.
Right.
that you don't even remember learning it, but there's something like native in the sense of like natal and birth that is comforting, reminds you of something, or there are smells of foods that have positive associations, and the amygdala just can let go a little.
Mhm.
Um, Often, uh, religious or spiritual practices involve community,
Mhm.
um, or intergenerational presence of one's own family, even intergenerational interactions.
Mhm.
Um, so there are these other ways that kind of muscle memory is awakened, um, around belonging and connectedness.
Mhm.
Out of this vast net you cannot fall, which is a kind of motif in different spiritual traditions, whether around mindfulness or the sense of family or tribe or belonging, um,
I think that can
or
also
even the
apply.
ideology.
Can
Yeah.
it also apply, I would think it can, to families who have no religion? When we're talking spirituality, I think it can encompass, like you said, something bigger than yourself. I know when I had a recent trauma, one of the things that helped me through it the most, I mean, in addition to the obvious things, a good therapist and family, but were the trees in my
Yes.
backyard, literally just sitting
100%.
on them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and I think Susie, you and I experienced it after Sandy Hook. We came together. There's that great coming together as a community, right? Every person in that community and beyond that community and around the world was impacted in some way. Just from the outpouring of feedback that we got, but to be within the context of that community, that coming together, that sense of greater belonging or belonging that's greater than ourselves, than just one. We are not alone. We are many.
Hmm.
And in that suffering made it, I think, at least perceptually for me, made it lighter in some way.
yes.
Like it wasn't, not light by any stretch of the imagination, but slightly less, um, less solitary.
So psychologists have, a term for this, right? When they're talking developmentally, um, which is co-regulation. Right. As infants, we have experiences, we have no language to sort of package, no way to compartmentalize, no way to understand. Um, we, our senses that we don't even know how to differentiate the universe from ourselves, right? We don't even have gross motor control at the beginning, to like move things, or like the teddy bear is too close. I am going to push it away from me. We don't that even our spatial concepts aren't organized, by language or by the available structures,
Right.
neurologically that are still developing. Um, but we do have ways of unconsciously indicating that we're in distress, even if it's like a bubble in our belly that's uncomfortable, like acutely uncomfortable. A look will come over a baby's face, before they burp or hiccup, or before they cry, even, and we can read it. Or if we're not looking at them, or it's not that obvious, then there is a cry. Um, but the adults, just showing up and knowing, oh, I think it's a burp, and not, oh God, the universe is an unbearably scary and painful place to be. Just there, I got this, and my heart rate is still regular while yours is doing all these crazy things because there are stress hormones as soon as your amygdala picked up on danger. Um, that other larger nervous system that is regulated provides for the one that is highly dysregulated. So part of the reason that it's valuable sometimes to be able to draw on spirituality, rituals, or practices that remind us of our sense that the universe is a cosmos, right? That it's ordered and there's not chaos, that this is somehow a safe space, is that it provides that to the adults. The adults have it, like they have the whole cosmogony of like, and we go to church because, and when we align our spine with the trees and we take a deep breath and we like cleanse the whatever and exhale before we go in for the hug, like my carbon dioxide to you, and now your, whatever it is for the adults, their nervous system becomes more of a resource for the kids' nervous system because they don't speak cosmogony and oxygen, carbon dioxide, cycle, ecosystem, compassionate universe. And we see that also in what we tend to call religion, but it's not only in the religions that we think of, community practice, culture around experiences, let's say, that human beings have known for many millennia are part of the human experience, like death and illness. And there are even animal species that have what looks like a kind of ritual instinct around this is going to be too much for this being, so we show up. And now there's a collective nervous system.
Speaking of culture, culture, as we know, and faith can shape a family's understanding of trauma and healing. How do you approach a situation where a child's trauma or what happened to them challenges the family's spiritual beliefs?
That's a great question.
So that's really hard. There's where it challenges the family's beliefs. There's also where the trauma is challenging for the culture or the leadership of a community. And so there isn't that sort of instinctive response, the move in that is what I was just describing a moment ago, is almost the way our immune system responds to, oh no, there's been a breach in the body. So it's a very natural thing. Where that kind of natural healing response is inhibited by beliefs, it can be acutely painful, partly, I think, because there's an expectation of us, even on an organismic level, that pain can be met,
Right.
and then it will be okay. Or this is where I go for solace or support or reassurance or meaning. And if I can just get that, then it will be okay. And when anything is getting in the way of that response, even if it's just invisibility, like I haven't known how to convey this because I didn't have the words, or I didn't know if it was okay, but usually my needs are anticipated. But also when it's forced and reinforced, we do not acknowledge such things, or we cannot show compassion because then there's something extra excruciating, I would say, even corrosive in the delay of the imagined response or the withholding of a response. I mean, I don't know, that's not the solution, but I want to just make sure I'm only addressing the question you're asking.
Yeah, no, that makes
Did
sense.
that?
I thought of it only because, in doing a recent research project, I spoke to a couple of families who had lost a child to suicide. And some of the feedback they got, especially if they were in the Catholic or Baptist religion, was, some of them would say your child's in hell, or, feedback that was very hurtful. And a couple of people I talked to said I left after that, but others were struggling. They didn't want to leave. But that was, that's where they found solace, but yet they were getting this toxic
Kind of
feedback.
conflictual
It was,
message.
it was difficult.
It is, and it's also, it's not just a conflictual message. It's a genuine conflict, right? Because if community is healing, if it's a community that shares a a narrative, not only of their own, but about the universe, and others don't share it, or a set of values that, is where the roots draw water, then leaving because one is in pain and losing resource in the leaving, um, is like a non-choice. But staying where it's toxic, it's also not a choice. And I think this is, um, people experience religious trauma. This is one form of it. So trauma that happens in the theater of religion, so with the members of a community, where that is the defining feature of the community, or in those spaces.
Mhm.
Um, but it can also be in the realm of meaning, where there's this rupture and unmet need. This is one of the reasons I think that people distinguish religion from spirituality, where spirituality includes the communing with the trees and everything intuitive and biological, organismic, I mean, everything, including neurologically, how we navigate meaning and form language and what we consider relational and emotional, um, dimensions of our lives. And where religion is more formalized and has taken on specific language and behavioral codes and theme colors,
Mhm.
and tribal in and out with a particular history and boundaries, and sometimes membership and an address and a tax ID. I think there are times when we can also see in religion or religious communities where actually some traumatic thwarting of what is natural for human beings and others, and what is healing, um, got distorted.
Mhm.
And what you have is a fixed avoidance, or a determined dissociation,
Mhm.
or transcendence and stigmatizing. And here we cut off, the way we do from traumatic or
Yeah.
too painful or too overwhelming experiences in our own life or our own body. Like, well, that's interesting. I see the splinter coming out of somebody's arm, like, and maybe I will feel it later, but now it's really constructive that this is
Yep.
not my issue.
Mhm.
Sometimes communities organize around, certain silences or avoidances because
Yeah.
that's the survival mechanism for the community. And then you can see it later on, and you can see what collectively wasn't resolved within religious communities. Sometimes there are people who can be uncomfortable with what got, um, that sort of developmental thwarting, that traumatic strain, and they will be active in addressing it, and they will find voice in their own experience and bring awareness to the blind side.
Mhm.
Or they can sometimes drop into deeper spirituality, like, well, actually, I went back and I studied our ancient texts, which my religious leader doesn't know about, but it looks like there used to be a name for this, or there used to be a practice before the dislocation of the community, or before the priesthood was overtaken by, or when they didn't need to accommodate a different, ruling power in a
Yeah.
democratic environment, or what have you. But I have a sense of my spirituality, or the thing that I got through whatever the ritual was, actually felt deeper than just checking off the boxes of my being a good religious practitioner in my community. And I have a direct line to the divine, the universe, the what is not named, but I can feel it when we chant together, what have you.
Yes. And I was also impressed by how many, there are a number of people working with faith leaders around the country to educate and help them help
Mm.
parishioners who are struggling, while without losing their own, faith, but also without, spreading dogma that's going to not be helpful if somebody's suffering. If they really are. There's a lot of efforts to educate out there.
So I have a question. So when you have, and I loved your response to the last question. So this is a piggyback off of that. So when you have a spiritual community or a religious community where there is that kind of avoidance or,
Mhm.
what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of the pink elephant is in the living room, but no one is
Mhm.
talking about it. How could you advise the adults in the situation, so with a traumatized child or a traumatized young person, like how do we help them get around that so that they can get what they need to be able to show up for their young person? Does that make sense?
It does. So let me answer an easier version of that question first, actually. It's so easy that it might not even be asked. So I think often the growth, the expanded understanding, the deepening understanding in religious leaders who have not dealt with certain kinds of trauma
Mhm.
or learned how common they are. Um, their curiosity about how to be supportive and address these things, and their willingness to learn and their availability to sort of prioritize this and make room to be humble learners. It happens most naturally when the whole collective is undergoing something. So when there's a pandemic,
Mhm.
or there's an earthquake, or there were fires, and a lot of people were affected, and then part of their identity as communal leaders is you're being looked to address this, or you're seeing these signs yourself and raising your hand and saying, I have a concern. And then you're asking the question. So the people who know something from their experience or their studies or their expertise or what have you,
Mhm.
um, can respond. It's it's a much taller order to get the ear of someone um, who's being asked, sometimes not in the language even that is most meaningful to them, to just turn their attention towards a unique exception that is tinged with this valence of danger, powerlessness, a need for them to confront something that they're totally ignorant about, or worse, even we're sort of programmed
Mm.
to keep at arm's length.
Yep.
Um, so, what can be really helpful for the individual or the family who are in that position of not yet being supported by their community or the understanding of their leadership is to find their community in terms of what they're going through, the other people who have been through this, because that, um, I want to say, it, it eases the pressure. It reduces some urgency for the person that they, their pastor or their religious communal leader, to be the one responding.
Mm.
And it's more of this resource, like which collective nervous system can I have and feel support with, and who can give me language, um, even if it's just a sort of transitional object, sort of proximal. It still won't be in the meaningful language of my own tradition, but
Mm.
at least I'm not coming to this person and needing them to get really literate, really on my side, somehow really comfortable with everything they don't know before this, and then also really creative, where they can say something that they've never said before because they've gone, well, I want to look up this biblical passage because this is reminding me, or I want to go into my community because I have my own commitment to meeting all of these needs. And we haven't talked about this, but now I know more. And then I can say, you know what? In this text that we usually forget about, because this was from a time when,
Mhm.
Mhm.
these things used to be talked about, but not in modernity, or these things used to happen. And I had no idea they were still happening, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
They were talked about in totally different language, and it was actually positive. So it never came up before because we somehow see it as negative. But since you said, twice blessed, that made me think about. Anyway, so now I can meet you where you are and offer you something because I'm used to knowing more than my flock. Um, so there are practices or there are places we can go that get the collective into a rhythm collectively, or into shared experience, or sort of that prime everyone for an experience. Like the ram's horns are behind me. Like there are sounds that have a certain effect on human beings, and there are foods that are sweeter or make us cry, or this is what it's like to fast. But co-regulation and the idea of a collective nervous system is not just when there is something that brings us into a shared experience. It's also um, that when one person is really powerfully, in particular, in their own nervous system experience, others will pick up on it. Like we have that language with each other. If I'm told that if you put a bunch of metronomes on a table together and you start them all at different times and what have you, eventually you will observe, I'm sure there are videos online, that they come into entrainment. There's this, unison. And part of my understanding also is that quantum theory was developed by starting to notice these things that we sort of don't know how they happen, and before we would have said it's random, and at the same time we named what we knew, which is that if you have a body of water where the temperature is all uniform
Mhm.
completely between two panes of glass, and you pour hot water in one corner and cold water in another corner, we know that eventually there will be an average temperature that is evened out around the whole thing. But this is similar to sort of how we've evolved in our study of trauma. But if you are not overwhelmed, if you can sort of, even as a mathematician who loves precision,
Mhm.
bear to look at the fact that there are these chaotic swirls. Are they shaped like paisley? Is it more about like the excess energy in the hot water molecules that is like dissipating, or is it more about the cold that have a relative, dearth of energy? And is it adjacent to adjacent, and like and what does it look like, and how is it different every time, and what else determines the turbulence, shapes and what have you? Then you can have a science of sort of this is how it works. When someone is really in their own state, other nervous systems around them will read it on a level that we would not consider conscious. It does not have to be conscious. It's
Mhm.
one person letting the door slam behind them just by not being careful because they're distracted about whatever in the boardroom before the
Mhm.
meeting starts, and everybody going, is this about the third quarter reports? Because that was the boss. Are they going to, my friend was, and then it's how that person behaves at the four-way stop sign on the way home. And if they trip on their kid's toy when they walk in the door, then the child is affected by the nervous system of the person who let the door slam.
Wow.
So the spiritual, even ancient communities we're very aware that this happens. I mean, you can also think of one kid whining, in the restaurant or losing it at the amusement
Yep.
park or what have you. And so there are tribes that go, oh, this one had a nightmare. Come on, community. Like we need to dance. We need to be in support. This one is not okay. This one has lost a loved one. It's not just tactical. It's there is an emotional disturbance here and someone is not feeling okay. We all will not be okay unless. Um, but again, even unconsciously, our nervous systems are affected by one another. So sometimes spiritual traditions, culture, religions will kind of m- make this conscious, or at least we have the vestiges of the consciousness in these are the practices for when
Yeah. Wow.
XYZ happens.
Lovely.
So here's again a kind of an offshoot question, but almost opposite. When in the work that I do here in Florida, sometimes when tragedy strikes, a family or a part of a community, um, one or more of the individuals might turn away from faith, might turn away from
Mhm.
their spirituality, might shut that door. And I guess my question is when let's say adults do that within the context of a family, where does that leave their young person who's
Mm.
experienced this traumatic event? And how would you guide, instruct, inform a parent who's struggling in that way?
So this feels like it's in parallel, an adjacent answer, but I want to be true to this rather than kind of hit the funny bone. So here's where I'll come in. When I first started really working in the field, I came to a trauma treatment center as a somatic experiencing practitioner because all of my colleagues were saying, you need to be doing this work. And I thought, Rabbi was in microscopic letters, and I hoped it wouldn't get in the way of anything. And the owner leaned forward and she went, oh, you could do spiritual counseling. This is sort of, I don't want to say it's anathema to Jews, but we preaching proselytizing as a people. And on a ethno-cultural level, there tends to be a lot more of like, fighting won't let it get in the way. I can have a universal perspective because I actually think that's what's there. Um, Deeply religious people who were not Jewish were the ones who were seeking me out, um, grappling with what their faith tradition told them about suffering, like feeling like they must have caused it. And I started realizing that um, the deep thoughtfulness about human nature that is rabbinic tradition, it sort of forms from this, thinking a lot about it, feeling into it. Um, and being mindful of how do we nurture, again, that's rabbinic thought. It was healing, but it's also a tradition and a history of a people that could not avoid trauma. Right? I mean, talk
Right.
about only if it happens to the collective, not a problem. Tons was happening to the collective, kind of always, including during the emergence of the rabbinic with a capital R tradition itself. um and I think that tends to make it um, non-toxic in universal settings because, for example, our tradition includes arguing with God, not shutting down, feeling shamed, judged, and like sent to hell, but Abraham argues with God, actually says, "Halila lach," like shame on you. Like, aren't you the one who inspired us with justice? And I don't see the justice. And God kind of relents and says, you know, you have a point. Moses argues with God. Yeah, you're so compassionate, but you're fed up with the people who, well, then I would quit. And God says, you know what? You're right. I was quick in my temper. It's sort of, there's a kind of model where you have a healthy adolescent parent interaction, and the parent is able to go, I was too hard on you, or you have a point, or I left this to be random in my infinite wisdom, but actually, when it's random, sometimes it's too hard. What do you think? And so there's room. And now I'm the mother of teens, right? Like there has to be, if I mean it when I say, you can always say anything to me, there has to be room for you're the worst mother and everything positive you say is probably not positive. I mean, there has to be room that if I'm
Sure.
an infinite parent, then I can hold this. And again, out of this vast net, you cannot fall. I have been struck, particularly facilitating spirituality groups in intensive trauma treatment among adults, by the similarity between very different religions and their concept of the divine. That it, like, how does that happen?
Mm.
Female God, polytheistic, multiple gods, pantheistic, one God, very male, etc.
Mhm.
But the similarity is kind of everything that you would project into an ideal parent, a benevolent, wise, you know,
Mhm.
all powerful being who cares about me, who sees me. And even though they know that I don't always get it right, and that sometimes I even make a choice that I think is wrong, out of this vast net, I cannot fall.
And the loving
The
parent.
parent who, yeah, the parent who walks away, it's wonderful if there's a context where everybody can say, yeah, like this is the part where Moses said, I quit, or this is the part where Jesus broke down and was like, I don't think the contract or the inspiration extends this far. The I guess one story that sort of captures this is, you know, Moses returns from his own 40 days on the mountain with the tablets of divine inspiration for here's how we manifest cosmos as a human community. Here's
Mhm.
order with freedom and boundaries and intention. And he sees the golden calf. The people couldn't handle his being away that long, and he's furious and he smashes the tablets.
Mhm.
So the broken smithereens were carried by the people through the entire trek in the wilderness. Not only the new tablets he engraved, but also the smashed pieces. So if one's communal narrative,
Mhm.
whether it's from the mythos or Bible, as it were, of that community, or just the norms of the social contract of our congregation of humans, includes a place for the moment of breaking down,
Yes.
the moment of doubt in the relationship. I mean, even in couples relationships, I need to tell you that I feel like you just proved that you don't love me. And we have a talk about it. Or I need the space to myself now, which doesn't mean I never want you to ever, see me again or speak to me again. If there is room for, oh, the father is going through a trauma,
Yes.
like he absolutely needs his time away. This has completely wrecked his sense of whatever divine promise or social contract, or this community holds all, or you can trust the universe, or God won't give me anything more than I can handle. That has been shattered. That's the break in his spiritual experience of the world, where spirituality, this is how it's often defined in research to be universal, is the sense of connectedness to what is beyond oneself. The
Right.
trees, the humans, the history, whatever, that just got disrupted,
Yes.
and he's licking his wounds. It does not, the community can say, okay, he's also not eaten for however many days. He's having a trauma. Who's making sure the kids eat? And this is, for example, part of the way that the collective nervous system mobilizes around grief and mourning. They're
Sure.
probably going to forget to turn the stove off if they turn it on. They're just in that shock state. They won't
Yep.
remember to eat. They might not remember to cook the egg. Right? Like, who's going to show up at the house of the people who cannot bear to go to work or be in the world or sing happy songs?
Mhm.
And how do we address those needs? Because it's perfectly natural. So I would say the same of the spiritual break that the parent feels, which is not, don't worry, we'll indoctrinate your children while you're struggling with the doctrine. It's just lots of other things that the
Yes.
community provides in the spirituality,
And you
which
don't
is,
have to abandon your core beliefs in order to adopt that perspective.
even if you're saying, I hate the church that's teaching my kids that God loves them. And I don't believe it I remember growing up in Reader's Digest that my grandmother would give me her old copies of.
Yep.
There was always an advertisement for the poster of the footprints in the sand. Remember that
Uh-huh. I remember
classic?
that. Yep.
You know, how come in the moments in my life where I needed you the most, I can see there's only one set of footprints. Like, people, adults, fully formed adults, encounter experiences that overwhelm even our ability on the level of meaning to orient and respond
Yeah.
Yes.
to, right? For there to be some continuity that we can live with, breathe through, make sense of, find meaningful,
Well, the
um,
word,
at least in the moment.
Right.
And that's trauma. So we go, okay, in this moment, how do we carry? Not, oh, you've made an informed decision and we will
and in this
hold you
moment,
to
I
that.
mean, leads me into somatics because it's a word that's getting more and more traction now, which I guess is a
Yeah.
good thing. And it's something you do a lot of. What are specifically some practices that a parent or caregiver can do with a child who is overwhelmed?
Oh my.
Hmm.
Um, well, I would say the most important thing, this feels like it's part of a lot of religious and spiritual hygiene too, in terms of, spoken. understandings, um, is to attend to their own. So
Mhm.
they have the larger nervous system in the room, even if the tiny one is having a very powerful experience and effect. Um, if that pulls us out of our felt sense, which I would say is one way of translating the word somatic, where soma is the medical word for a cell body. It's an ancient Greek word for body. So in medical terms, it refers to the cell. If I can't feel my own cellular being, which is where I have access to, um, you know, am I hungry? Do I feel safe?
Mhm.
Um, emotionally, sort of where is the energy moving in my body? If I'm just in triage and identifying the patient as my kid or the loved one who has something wrong with them because they're in trauma,
Mhm.
I won't be able to help them get into that place where they are. So, again, for parents, the familiar experience, I think, is early parenting or like even before early childhood, like baby. Someone who's in trauma is not fully in their experience, because one of the ways that we deal with it is being pulled out of what is overwhelming, which often means being pulled out of part of our own experience,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and being focused on the danger or totally shutting it out and just not being here. So here. Being here. So however parents can support that for themselves, for some people it's with liturgy, even murmuring words that feel familiar, which can be about the soothing effect of a kind of sotto voce, like hum, and the movement of the lips, which is also just movement of the body and the jaw, so that we don't go into our own break. It's just keeping things moving. Like for the people watching or listening who are in cold climates, when the meteorologist says the temperatures are dropping below freezing tonight, just turn on the tap so that the water won't get stuck in the pipes and they won't
Right.
burst. So what keeps you moving, going, and if you have a spiritual tradition that keeps things in flow, I think in Csikszentmihalyi's book on flow, he refers to even the importance of teaching children poetry by rote when they're younger. Natan Sharansky says he survived solitary confinement in the Soviet Union, in part um, by reciting psalms and making sure he still remembered them in order. I think there was a father son somewhere. For some reason, I'm thinking Ireland, but I'm not solitary confinement in Ireland. But where do you know something? Where do you experience flow? And often culture provides
Yeah.
language, or language that has rhythm that provides that.
It's interesting you
Um,
should say that because
yeah.
just I had a very major loss a few years ago, and I was raised Catholic, but I don't practice at all anymore. We raised our kids in the Jewish faith, but when I was faced with a moment of, just overwhelming feeling, I found myself reciting just from childhood the Lord's Prayer, which I haven't said in decades.
Mhm.
But it was the only thing I could grasp that, like, just it was almost like a rocking or a chant.
Mhm.
I find sometimes in yoga the chants do the same thing, but that particular moment, which was very gripping, that was the only thing I had, and I used it, and I surprised even myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say also in terms of protective factors, that's one of the valuable things about imparting some kind of culture to children. So when I grew up in the Midwest, and I remember uh, when I got to middle school, I used to have like a quarter-mile walk home from the public bus, and I remember discovering that. It was ironic to me because my bat mitzvah meant so much to me. I would sing Jingle Bells all the way home. In the Midwest, Jingle Bells starts playing as soon as Thanksgiving is over, and it kind of goes till New Year, and it's very catchy. It's very, very catchy. And I thought, okay, so this is really weird. One of my kids, just that's the first thing she figured out on the piano. I mean, it's such a great melody. But also now they're singing viral TikTok songs. And some of those are good, but there's actually a fabulous K-pop movie that just came out where the not so good influences make incredibly catchy songs.
Mhm.
I was able to go, let's do Hava Nagila every time, and then it just started happening unconsciously. Also incredibly catchy. Harry
Mhm.
Belafonte did a gorgeous version. I mean, like all over, right? Um, but the value, this brings us all the way back to the beginning. Sometimes the value of what we're offering our children is more the protective factor than the emergency intervention. Because
Sure.
when something is an emergency intervention, also, it can feel tinged and it can feel insincere. Like,
Mhm.
here's what you do as medicine. Who likes medicine? I don't want penicillin. I love a good kale salad recipe, right? Because that's about right, this not being tinged with the sense that I'm the only one having this, and it's because something is wrong with me, and how soon can it be over with? Because I want the whole underlying experience to be gone and never to think about it again. So, what can we give ourselves and each other that is, and here's a response to the question about somatic, um, that is tied to what we're doing with our body, what we're experiencing or feeling in our body, meaning, and like an overarching story that gives us a sense of orientation in the world and this life, emotions that are good. It's not like anybody's grandmother is going, how can I make them like the smell of cinnamon? But if someone is a nurturing, loving grandparent who happens to cook with cinnamon, then cinnamon sticks become a resource for that child, even as an adult. Never mind
Definitely.
its antibacterial, properties and all these other wonderful things about cinnamon. But how how can we provide for that? And even if we haven't in the past, what provided it for me, even if I don't see this as a religious thing per se, um, and and so how can I draw on it in this moment and give it to my children? And sometimes what we will find is, oh, I sort of experienced it because it was kind of this forgotten ritual, but people still had um this this expectation of physical contact when they went into church. So there was a lot of hugging. And
Mhm.
now I'm always holding the keys in one hand and my cell phone in another, and my kid is holding their cell phone in one hand and their sandwich in another. And we haven't been doing that much. But what if we sort of consciously, with intention, bring it in? What if
Yeah.
I like, at least when I light the candle, or at least when I give them their breakfast, there's this, or there are moments when I say, and I will build it into the day, I will
Right.
ritualize it. Like in school, there are rituals, and how do I bring in this that is sustaining, and turn to your desk partner and just look at each other silently
And it's
until
easy.
you smile for 30 seconds, or let the hug last 40, or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it makes it, I love that point. I remember in the weeks after the Sandy Hook school shootings, I was the second grade class parent, and we had a Christmas party planned. And the question came up, like, this terrible thing just happened. What do we do? And we ended up coming together as a class.
Mm.
And there was music, and there was food, and there was grief, and there was tears at the same time. Like, there was presence, there was the ability to have presence in all things.
Yes.
So those who needed, and we had gotten two kittens the day after. That's a whole other story. But we had the kitten room, and the kids would go down into our daughter's bedroom, and the act of petting, right? And the purr of the kittens and the cuteness of the kittens. And it was just this kind of amazing moment in time where it was parents and children, and people were doing different things in our house based upon what they needed in that moment.
It's so interesting. I think you're like gesturing to the collective nervous system, the addressing of different needs. And it's almost as if you're like
Yeah.
describing the layout and the different kinds of activities in these sort of discrete places. But this is a collective. There's something harmonious, even without, again, the precise dynamics between one room and another. But in terms of surviving trauma, and I would say this is even true about a religious tradition, sort of making it through these moments that can be shattering. And if the whole community pays attention to what happens with one individual, actually the whole community can have a spiritual crisis. I mean, like resilience that we talk about is a kind of elasticity or agility. And um, when there is room for more of that, even in terms of how we're going to interpret or drop into the meaning of a Christmas tree, or it's going to be the same melodies, but we're going to be more mindful when we sing this one so the tears have enough time to make it out and down our cheeks while we're still singing it, and so that we have enough time then to still hear ourselves singing so and so's favorite melody rather, while the tears are running down our cheeks, and we're registering our sadness, and we are remembering them, and it is soothing, and we also love it more, and we will also always remember them when we're singing it. Then it's not just a question of do we abandon and break away, or do we ignore the trauma and try to overcome, by transcending and focusing on happy and making a choice that leaves anyone behind. It's it's are there is there even more resource in this tradition than we're accustomed to paying attention to, because usually enough is enough. Actually, we trust it so deeply that there was just a part of this painting we never noticed before, but it's here for us.
But I want to make sure we ask you our final question, which we ask everyone who's on the podcast. If you could go back in time and
Mm,
teach either your parents or your caregivers one thing about trauma,
mm,
is there anything you would tell them?
mm. I I think um, it's not something that I would tell them. In a way, I think I learned so much through them, and even the tradition that was transmitted to me, um, that they come back to me and ask me about, sort of ask me for, not realizing they transcended. It would be what I would want for them, which is a community that could support them in their vulnerable
Mhm.
experiences. Um, and so I would say that this is something that we can offer to each other that we don't all think we can offer to each other. Um, and that rather than drawing on religion or spirituality as a tool, or merely as a resource, that actually one of the most profound things about having this lens or these threads, as it were, in the healing process is that I think you just said it's like stitching more of who a person is into their own healing. So it's
Mhm.
actually being able to say, ah, yes, and you, and this, and remember that moment, on the path, with the crown of thorns. Or actually, did you know that Moses wept and fell on his face? Or you made me think, but like, all of the dimensions of who you are in the healing and can be. And sometimes as a community or as family, we don't know the clinical things about
Mhm.
the trauma, but we know the love is infinite, and here's how I show up for you, and here's the groundedness that I draw because I'm still comfortably nestled within, and so you can have that. And and outside of our family system, we can offer this to each other, and that, I think, if that were being offered, a generation or generations ago by people in neighboring communities, the world would be very different, very, very, very different now. um,
Mhm.
And it's not too
Definitely.
late to do it now for each other.
Exactly.
So
That's a
We have
great
to show
place
it.
to wrap up.
Yeah, we live in interesting times and we do need to show up for
mm,
each other. This was wonderful. Thank you so
thank
much
you.
Very
Thank
grateful
you
for
so
being with us
much
and
for all
talking
you're
with us.
doing.
time. And yeah, thank you for being with us and wishing you well.